From the nonpartisan Maddy Institute and the California channel at the state capitol, this is a Maddy Policy Brief. Welcome. We're talking with Carol D'Alia, the Executive Director of the Little Hoover Commission, about Commission's recent Commission report on occupational licensing in California. You noted in your report there have been no comprehensive attempts at reforming occupational licensing in more than a decade. It's a long time. Why do you think the Commission's recent recommendations might succeed where past reform efforts really haven't?
Well, we decided to stay away from the big, broad, one-size-fits-all because you really can't reform licensing for a doctor, and then look at a manicurist in the same sort of vein.
Yeah, 250 of these licenses, that would take you some time.
Right. We also think the timing is right with the federal government being supportive of this, and it's a really bipartisan issue. We're having prices raised at the same time we're fencing people out of good jobs.
Yeah, it seems like everybody would agree to that. So two of your recommendations deal with data collection and a comprehensive license review. What are your recommendations and why are they necessary?
So as I mentioned earlier, the occupational licensing hits certain Californians more so than others, but we don't really know because we don't have demographic data. So our recommendation was have the boards, some of them are required, but have all of them collect and make available demographic data. So we at least have a starting point. What are the effects of the licensing? Who is affected? Is there a negative effect? We just don't know.
Older workers affected, younger workers affected, male, female, et cetera. You don't have that data right now.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so and you also recommended changes in what's called the sunrise review process. That's the decision of whether or not we even have licensing. And also the sunset review process, and that is, do we keep the licensing that we currently have? What were your recommendations in those regards?
So the sunrise process is used a little bit less because that takes a licensed group or somebody who wants to be licensed coming to say this is why we should be licensed. And that hasn't been very successful, at least under the current administration. The sunset process, every 4 years, every board under the Department of Consumer Affairs comes up for review. And they provide the staff with, here's our data, here's the information. Again, you don't see consumers at those hearings. You see the board, you see the licensed professionals and their associations, and it's an arduous process. It's difficult.
So, so that you'd like to see more of that done then in a little more detail. Staffing, I think, is also an issue in terms of those review processes. You also we talked earlier about reciprocity, and that is, between states, for licensing. What are your recommendations in that regard?
Well, we made a pretty bold recommendation that reciprocity become the default. Now, a lot of California boards...
So it's the reverse. And
yes.
so what you're saying is you start off with assuming it's okay, as opposed to assuming it's not okay.
Right. And then you make the boards, in their normal process, in their sunset review, say this is why California is different. This is why we need additional requirements to practice this profession in our state versus any other state. We also talked about a hybrid where maybe there's 5 states, 10 states that are very similar to California. Well, say, okay, if you're from New York, Florida, whatever state, you can practice in California so that we're not sinking to perhaps what is the lowest common denominator out there.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. We talked earlier about staffing. What's exactly the issue with staffing?
It just was, again, going back to the sunset review process where they're faced with information that comes from the board. They have to do a lot of these. They're the only committee that looks at these boards. One person even suggested maybe they should have to go through the full committee process, and that would have a lot of different hearings. Instead, it's kind of one quick hearing with a lot of information. We thought about, should there be some side of outside information, but at the end of the day, the commissioners were feeling like the process works, they just need a little more staff. Yeah.
Sometimes penny wise and pound foolish, right? So things are happening. It's costing consumers a lot of money because they're not taking a serious look at what the issues are in terms of occupational licensing. So pay me now or pay me later, I guess is the question there. Let me ask you this though, last question on best practices. This is an issue I'm sure that occurs in a lot of states. Did you look around and what other states are doing, or even within certain departments in California, what they might be doing is what's working? For a more in-depth analysis of this and other public policy issues important to Californians, please log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org and click on the Policy Analysis tab.